Guys, welcome. My name is Melissa D. White, and I want to welcome you to More Than an Employee, Overcoming Bias Through Nurturing Employee Relationships, where, as Dr. Debbie said, this is more than about employees, it's about people. So we are going to unpack a necessary conversation, a solution-based dialogue. I brought in a team of experts here. Conversations are important, and I understand that more than anyone else, but at some point the conversation has to become action, so it's not entertainment. So we're here to give you solutions, data driven statistics on how we eradicate bias. So again, I'm joined by Dr. Debbie Phillips and Dana Hill. I want to give a sincere thank you to the Grace Hill team for creating a safe space for us to have this conversation and continue our long-term partnership of solutions through training, learning, and development. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, Tara. I want to make sure all participants, except for our panel, are muted. Myself and Tara will be moderating the comments. So if you have a question or comment for our panel, do not hesitate at all. This is a safe space for us to have the conversation of solutions. All right. So Dr. Debbie and Dana, can you all see my screen? Let's go ahead and get this started.
Yes, we can. Thank you, Melissa. So guys, we're asking everyone to pull up a chair and join the conversation between leaders and certainly friends who have collectively researched, studied, and modeled building better relationships to overcome bias in our own relationships between the three of us. Melissa mentioned frequently that Debbie and I are considered her mentors. That relationship has evolved certainly beyond that, and we are just givers. We are sowing and reaping and harvesting into each other on a regular basis, which I think has prepared us collectively for this time and for this moment. So before filling the chair, we want you to think about, do you have a solid foundation? And so we're going to make sure that we're providing a solid foundation and solutions and actionable takeaways that we can see the change that we want to see reflected in our own organization. So the conversation topics, as you can see today, foundation. Provide definitions and examples of successful measures taken inside and outside of the multifamily industry. Then we're going to do the frame. We're building our house, guys. How to address bias through relationships of mentorship, sponsorship, and advocacy. And I can truly speak to that as I have benefited from all of those. And then the cover, the roof to the house. We're going to provide a guide for leadership to engage in conversations at every level and take action on dispelling internal and external bias. So let's get into a formal introduction. For those of you that have not met me, I'm Dana Hill. I work with Grace Hill and I cover sales in the Southeast. I also serve on the Atlanta Apartment Association Board of Directors and the Atlanta Apartment Life Regional Advisor. I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Debbie to introduce herself.
Well, thank you, everyone. It's a terrific Tuesday, and I am excited about being here. I'm a 32-year industry veteran. I spend most of my time in the area of leadership development, workforce development, and really helping people define their genius zone. So I'm excited to be here with you. This is an important topic, and I'll leave you with one thought. What's the biggest room in the world? The room for improvement. Let's go.
I love it. Thank you so much, Dr. Debbie. We're here to make room for improvement. My name is Melissa D. White. I'm a principal coach and consultant, and a certified coach trainer, executive coach at the Activation Hour. Also 16 years within the multifamily industry, 8 of those 16 years as a learning and development specialist and corporate trainer for our leasing teams. I also serve currently as the Director of Operations for the Cool Source, a digital marketing agency out of Atlanta, Georgia. This conversation for me was not an option, but it's a requirement. It's a requirement to give a voice not only to our people, but give legs to solutions and to come away with this better people. So as Dana stated, when we collectively put our heads together, we knew that we're in the people business. We're in the housing business. So what better way to tear down the old structure and create a new foundation, frame, and top it off with excellent leadership on exposing and dispelling bias. So our mission, Dana, please share exactly why we're here today.
So thank you, Melissa. Listen, you can't build a solid organizational structure that is built on bias. There's just no success in that. So what we wanted to do was lay a better foundation and frame the future of how our companies handle people, relationships, and overcoming bias. Before I really dig in, I have to acknowledge that my Grace Hill leadership, Drew Armstrong, CEO, and Kendall Presser, COO, just in their very being, challenges the concepts of bias. When we think of people who run our companies today, be it in multifamily or outside, honestly, because this is going to be an honest dialogue, we think white, middle-class males. And for us here at Grace Hill, we're being led by 2 strong, successful females, which is impressive on its own. And I will have to say also that what attracted me to Grace Hill was the fact that Drew and Kendall were at the helm and leading the company. And women typically, and I'm not trying to disparage our men, but women leaders bring a level of sensitivity and empathy to the job that sometimes men can lack. And I saw immediately from Drew and Kendall that when we were dealing with COVID initially, that they came around the table and were able to provide immediate, actionable takeaways, not only internally, but also for our partners who use our products every day. And many of them were grateful and thankful. However, when I saw the racial unrest that was going on in the country, honestly, I did not expect us to want to take on that elephant because it's an uncomfortable place and it requires you being able to have honest dialogue that I didn't think we as a company were ready to tackle. But just as they always do, they surprised me. And they reached out to me and said, Dana, I want you to address the company and let's talk about your experience as a Black woman in the industry. And we're going to take one of our values, which is learn forward. And we're going to choose to learn from you today, not only about your experience, but to share about the history of Juneteenth. And so I was given that opportunity. And then from there, they said, Dana, we want you and Jay to participate in our diversity inclusion task force, where we're really going to develop content around a solution and to help companies navigate through this difficult topic. From there, they said, Jay and Dana, we also would like you to co-chair our diversity and inclusion committee. And one of the people who coordinates, and we call her the mother of Grace Hill because she keeps us all together, is Patty Singleton. And Patty challenged Jay and I and said, this is not something that we're doing for the moment. This is something that we want to do that is going to be long-term, systemic, and we want accountability. And I love being a part of an organization that recognizes the need and is not afraid to step up to the challenge. And as a result, here we are today. And this is the beginning, guys. This is the beginning of us building our foundation.
So sometimes when we recognize that there's a crack in the foundation, we have to assess what we're built on. And a part of our assessment today is to get the language correct, to get the verbiage right. Oftentimes, words are used synonymously that truly do not have the same meaning. And if we misdiagnose the problem, then we will not get to a viable solution. Words such as race, racism, diversity, inclusion, injustice, bias, all of these things have very specific meanings, and I want to show you how they build upon themselves. The first thing that I'm on assignment to do today is to help you restructure and tear up the old foundation of the way you think. And you may be conscious or you may be unaware that this thinking is embedded within your process. So we want to shine light on it and lay a smoother, solid, concrete foundation for your organizations and healthy relationships to eradicate bias. So here are the facts. Dr. Debbie, give us some numbers.
Well, many of you know my personality, and I will tell you all the time that people have opinions all day long, but I always say, look at the evidence. And we have overwhelming evidence to understand the need for this kind of presentation that we have today. 4 out of 10 Americans identify with a race or ethnic group other than white. The other part is when you think about women of color who say that they have sponsors, listen to this, friends, and Melissa's going to talk about advocacy and sponsorship. But women of color say that when they have somebody speaking on their behalf, sponsoring them, they're 81% more likely to be satisfied with their career progression than those without a sponsor. And let me just get off on just one little tangent for a second. People are always saying, well, we need to, have a seat at the table. Leaders, we have to make the table larger. We have to make room for the chairs. And I'm going to share a lot more statistics as we go along. But if you think about it, only 4% of companies fully disclose their composition in the C-suite. And I'm going to talk about that a little bit more as it relates to attracting and retaining top-tier talent. But one thing that we know that racial and ethnic minorities accounted for all of the nation's population growth in the decade. Another disturbing fact that we have is 63% of Latino men and women do not feel welcome and included in meetings. So we have a lot of powerful data behind our recommendations today. And what is really, and I'm going to make the business case a little later in our presentation, but there's not one of us on this call today that doesn't have an open position. We are out there in a war for talent. We are struggling to find high-performing talent. And when you look at that last bullet point, more than 57% of millennials and Gen Z will base their decision on, does that company demonstrate a fair representation of diversity and inclusion? And I want you to stay to the end of this presentation, and I've got a golden nugget that I want to share that's really going to make a compelling business case for what we're talking about today. So I'll turn it back over to you, Melissa.
So there was another shocking statistic that came in right before our call today. Should I go ahead and share? Because this one I think was one of the most alarming, as I think I'm the millennial of the panel here. 63% of millennials would consider quitting their company if they did not prioritize diversity and inclusion. So leaders, if that does not wake you up to the fact of not only the buying power of millennials as our renter base, but also the reach of millennials and Gen Z as the extension of our workforce and those that are newly being indoctrinated into our business. 63%. Remember that number.
Melissa, I actually have another one.
Okay.
67% of job seekers overall look at workforce diversity when evaluating an offer.
Wow. You know, this is a great follow-up, Dana, to the conversation we had recently with NAA, that if we say that they're looking for diversity and inclusion in the company, where else do they see it other than in your marketing, in your website, in your actual presence, the aesthetics and the look and feel? Who are you showing as members of your company? That is a part of the marketing arm of your recruiting efforts. What does your company look like to those you want to join your organization? It's important.
And one thing I want to jump in here and say, you know, because I heard a leader the other day and they said, well, you know, during the COVID, you know, people are really, you know, thinking about staying where they are. They're not thinking about making a job move. And I said, listen, my research on employee engagement, a satisfied employee says, I like my work. An engaged employee says, I love my company. There's only about 18% of all employees that are truly engaged. And if we're going to retain that top tier talent, we've got to get serious about diversity and inclusion. And somebody said the other day, they said, oh, well, we need this as an initiative. I said, we don't need it as an initiative. We need it as a strategic imperative.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we've often said that, Dr. Debbie, that although we are using the phrases diversity and inclusion, we want to make it implicitly clear that racial bias and racial injustices are the focal point here, that the diversity is vast, but the gap here is the racial and ethnic diversity issue from the top down in our organizations. So these stats are very alarming and we have to take heed and have a solution. Not saying diversity and inclusion is not a solution, but not another task force, but some action. And we're going to get to that. Dr. Debbie, I know I did say it. We said we were going to call it out. We're calling it out. Let's go ahead and put some more concrete on this foundation. I'm going to give you some definitions here. All definitions are pulled from Merriam-Webster or dictionary.com. I'm a firm believer in words. I love words. I love the meaning of words. And I think when researching something and calling out issues for change, is very important to understand the synonyms and the antonyms to make sure where do we fall and where do we identify. Therefore, we know where we need to move the needle to change. First definition, bias refers to attitudes and stereotypes that affect our own attitudes and decisions, okay? Oftentimes, it's a stereotype that we may be unaware of, hence unconscious bias, and I'll get to several types of bias later. In addition to that, we're building here. Bias is the precursor to prejudice. Prejudice is a preconceived judgment or opinion, okay? So your attitudes lead to your judgments or your opinions. It's an adverse opinion leaning formed without just grounds, meaning you do not have a justified foundation to have the attitude or stereotype you have towards that population of marginalized people. So without just grounds, before sufficient knowledge. So ask yourself, your thought, your idea, or your opinion, is it based on sufficient knowledge? Is it on a firm foundation? Or is it an assumption rooted in bias? Very simple question. Cultural diversity. When researching this word, I realized the word diversity by itself was not enough because it means an array of things. And for today, like I said, we're very intentional on tackling cultural, racial, and ethnic diversity. It's defined as the cultural variety and differences. Let's take an assessment. Do you see variety and differences in your leadership? Do you see variety and differences in your middle management? Do you see variety and differences with your on-site teams? Do you see variety and differences among the suppliers and vendors you work with at your asset? Do you see variety and differences among the clients and partners you choose to align yourself with? It's required that we acknowledge the existence of cultural diversity in the world, society, and in institutions. And if our organizations don't reflect that, there's a misalignment. About 13% of the US population is comprised of minorities, of Black people. If your organization doesn't align with that baseline statistic, where do we go from here? Now, inclusion. There's building blocks here. If I had to say this was our building, these are the bricks. We have some cracks in our bricks, guys. Inclusion, the act or practice of including and accommodating people. Like Dr. Debbie said, build a longer table. After all, we're in the business of building homes. I'm sure we can accommodate more room at the table. And it's not only that, but are we accommodating for them to be seen, heard, acknowledged, and contributors to the change in your organization who have historically been excluded? Again, if I were to earmark anything, historically been excluded. There's a history of oppressed people and irrefutable proof of people who have been marginalized for racial reasons, socioeconomic reasons, and a vast amount of others. If we can stand on the principles of fair housing and protected class, can we not do the same based on race, gender, and sexuality or otherwise when it comes to building our people? And oh, this is probably the toughest one of all, Debbie and Dana, microaggressions. A comment or action that is, don't miss this, subtly and often unconsciously or unintentionally expressed. Guys, we're giving you some grace. Many of us, all of us included, express this prejudiced attitude unknowingly. Grace Hill has a commitment to even include a section where we talk about empathy, where defense is not empathy. They're not the same. So we want to ensure that we shine light on microaggressions, address it with empathy and corrective measure. Here's what it looks like. Dr. Debbie, I love what you always say about the head and the heart, and we have that in common. And in many of the messages I've shared on the issue of being more than an employee is how the head would be the mission of your organization, and the heart, the heartbeat, are the values. So this is what the head of bias looks like in a biased mind. You will get these slides, so if you want to sit with this information and even do your own self-assessment, knock yourself out, but we're calling it out. That bias, again, refers to attitudes and stereotypes that affect our own attitudes and decisions, meaning my bias may affect my attitude, which then affects my actions, meaning what I think affects how I feel. Therefore, my hands cannot really effectively do the work in an unprejudiced way of serving people. Got it? Okay. So the 6 types of bias are negativity bias, confirmation, resemblance, inattentional blindness, okay, bandwagon effect, and congruence. I'll give you a moment. You can take a screenshot or whatever you like, but sit with this. That's our call to action. Sit with this and identify it. Do the self-awareness and the work. Dana, you can't change what you can't see. Let's talk about it.
Absolutely. You know, it is important for us. I actually listened to someone today. It was Jason Stoughton on another webinar. And he shared a point about the fact that we are what we see. And so the fact that you don't get an opportunity to see yourself in these roles, see yourself elevating within the industry, gives you an immediate response of, I'm not welcome, and I'm not being included. And so we need to actually be intentional about making sure that we bring a face. We bring a face to the conversation. We bring a face into the room, in the organization. And that those faces, we are purposefully looking for people that are going to help us have many voices around the table. Companies are much more successful when they do make an intention of diversifying their board, their leadership, because we have the opportunity now in closed doors to talk about and share issues and situations that would sometimes be embarrassing if they were allowed to happen outside those closed doors. But we have that open conversation and dialogue with people who are coming from different perspectives to help us avoid making huge mistakes. Like Pepsi, you know, when they decided to have one of the Jenners actually do a commercial where she is holding up a Pepsi in front of a bunch of police officers. I believe it was Pepsi. Mm-hmm. And the response fell very negatively with the consumer, because we were thinking, how do you try to, you just simply simplify a very complex situation by saying, oh, let's just have a Pepsi and let's resolve the situation. And that would have happened if that room was diversified. There would have been people in that room that would have said that that's the wrong message to try to send. And so we benefit from having a variety of voices in the room. When Dr. Debbie talked about, you know, the business reason, you have the opportunity to be much more successful and to grow your company. And I know that we've got stats that we're going to share in regards to that, but I shared that in my conversation with Grace Hill, that statistically, companies that are diversified are going to be much more profitable than those that aren't.
Well, and I want to jump in here, and everybody that's taking notes, I want you to write down two thoughts. One is called the ladder of inference. And the ladder of inference is you take bits and pieces of data and you assign meaning to it, and then you take actions based on your own assumptions. So I just challenge us all to think in, you know, this last month, you know, when we have taken just little bits and pieces and not the whole picture, and we've assigned our own meaning to situations. The second thing that I want to remind you of, and this dates way back to our psychology days, it's called the Johari window, where you are thinking about and conquering your blind spots. And there's really 4 areas to the Johari window. It's, you know, what you know, what others don't know, and what someone knows about you that you don't know. And then there's that unconscious part where neither of you know. And I want you to really take some time in your small groups and unpack the ladder of inference and think about in situations where you need to bring others into the conversation so you don't put yourself out there on an island by yourself. You know, we understand that when you have diversity, when you have a more inclusive group, you know, the more diverse the group is, the more thought you can have. And I always encourage people, you know, don't just stay in the corner of your room. Don't be afraid to explore the other 4 corners of the room. And you'll really progress in your career when you can sit with others that don't share your same opinion.
Mm. That is so
Absolutely.
true. So true. I think that's a perfect place to insert a better definition here. As defined by the Bias Interrupter Survey Report, which we put links to all of these white papers and documents for you because these are organizations who are very intentional. They've done extensive research data and put mechanisms in place to eradicate bias. Implicit bias stems from common stereotypes. Stereotype activation, you need to know this. It is automatic. We cannot stop our brains from making assumptions. Remember the brain picture I showed you? Our brain is laden with assumptions. It's our wiring. However, stereotype application can be controlled. We can control whether we act on these assumptions. So that's what we're here to do today, is to identify. And again, I think we're up to maybe 4 coaching challenges here. The one Dr. Debbie just gave was number 3, about really looking at the ladder of influence in the Johari window, but also can we control whether we act on the assumption. It starts with you being self-policing and calling out your own bias. Can you be honest enough with yourself or even with your team? Let me tell you, over the last few months, I've had vast amount of conversations with leaders who there's 2 types. Those who don't acknowledge, matter of fact, 3. Those that don't acknowledge that there's an issue of bias, which really starts with them, but everyone else around them sees it, but no one is bold enough to manage up and call it out. Okay. Then you have those who are aware and are intentionally not changing or shifting their thinking. And then you have those who say, you know what? I'm aware, I'm intentional. And if we look at, a nod to, those who are in the emotional intelligence space, you have to shift from self-awareness to now how you change your relationship to social awareness. There's a shift that takes place. The problem is those who know and won't do anything about it. We have a duty and an obligation to address it, to call it out, and to be solution driven without recourse or repercussion. We can control those assumptions. Oh, y'all, we're just on the frame and the foundation was heavy. Whew, okay, we're gonna go through this a little quicker, but you guys, I saw a lot of comments asking, will I get the slides? Well, yes, absolutely, you'll get it because you will want to sit with this. We don't expect you to have all of the light bulbs and answers going off within an hour, but we're giving you data to take back to your leadership. Here's the framework here. These are 2 very different pictures, right? I mean, I'm not in construction or expert or anything, but I can pretty much tell that the structure on the left and the structure on the right are 2 totally different buildings. The one on the left is a house made of wood, which is very solid. Houses stand the test of time, storms, and they weather things made of wood. However, a house has a limited capacity on the number of occupants and how many people it can serve and provide shelter to. If you notice, very strategically, I picked the picture on the right where this building, we're going from a house to a building, which is structured with steel. And if you can even see beyond the steel framing, looks like snow-capped hills and mountains and some trees. So the elements of picture number 2 on the right are very different than the elements of the other picture. So your company, your organization is built in a very different ecosystem, and you have different things to weather now than you have in the past. We can no longer try to sustain on systems that were built for houses when we're building on somewhere with a different type of climate. The climate of the world is not the same. The climate of our industry, the climate of America, the climate of the world is not what it was maybe when your company started 30, 40, 50 years ago. The climate has shifted. So your framework is required to change. And this is how. I told you, we're not just having a conversation, we're giving you solutions. So I've done an extensive amount of research on the connectivity, the value of relationships on mentorship, sponsorship, and advocacy. And I share this more in a resource guide we'll give you at the end. This panel is a representation of sponsorship, mentorship, sponsorship, and advocacy at play. Okay. If you were to ask me, and many people have, Melissa, how do we eradicate these issues? How do I get diversity in my company? What if I don't have people of color or whatever in my geographical area? Well, you know what? Go find them, seek them out. You have to get outside of your company, leave your boardroom, walk your properties, go out into the community across the track to the schools that may not look like the ones you're accustomed to. Go to the other side of town. Go to HBCUs, historically Black colleges and universities, if you don't know what that means. Whatever the case may be, change is uncomfortable and it requires intentional mentorship. Dr. Debbie, let's talk about our mentorship relationship. You did something so strategic I have never seen in my 16 years in this industry. A few months ago, there was a scholarship luncheon hosted on your behalf, and it was, I don't know, maybe 200 something participants, I don't know, but it was the most diverse room I've ever seen in this industry. And I've been to a lot of conferences, and it wowed me. It wowed me to see so many people who felt the same love, support, commitment, and covering. And when I asked you about that, what did you say?
Well, I mean, it stems from, you have to set your intention. The most important work you will ever do is the work you do between your ears. And you have to get it right in your head first. And do you make mistakes along the way? Absolutely. But I set an intention way back in 2004 when I started teaching at the University of Georgia that I was going to do everything I could to expose people to this beautiful industry. And you have to set your intention, but I had Kenesha Franklin there and a lot of other students, but you remember what Kenesha said.
Absolutely, I do.
Kenesha came out, she worked at a warden, she was a warden in a prison, and she was separated from her daughter. And I shared with her the opportunity that this industry could give her as a single parent to reunite back with her child and to provide an incredible career for her. But it starts with setting your intention. You got to get your heart right. And you have to expose people. And I always say life is like a buffet. As leaders, we need to set the table, but we have to invite people to come and to sample what we're offering. And, you know, it's so important. And one of the key takeaways that I want to encourage everyone is a heart of hospitality, welcoming them with open arms, unconditional love. And that right there, you know, the world will be forgiving after they see your heart, but you can't attract much with a hard heart.
Oh, that's powerful. I see some people that concur. That really, I think that resonated deep. You have to get your heart right. You know what else Kenesha's challenge was to all of us who were in attendance that day? It was to reach across, and guys, I know, let me give you some more context here. Kenesha is an African-American female, a mother, I don't remember if she was a single mother or not, but a young mother who was on a very different career path. And she was, I believe, one of your students, or she was considering being in the program.
I saw her love for accounting, and I told her, woo, that's not my genius zone, girlfriend. Get with me.
So you identified talent. And when I asked you about that, you said the talent came from the heart. It wasn't so much about her color initially, but you understood the power of giving someone a chance who normally would not have had that opportunity. So you set the intention. And at the end of that speech Kenesha gave at that luncheon, she said, my challenge to you, and this is coaching challenge number 5, reach across the aisle, reach across the tracks. Shoot, go across the street, go find somebody who does not look like you and does not share your experiences and sow into them intentionally and openly. Because this sends a very loud message from the top down in your organization that I am no longer accepting sameness and likeness when differences and variety, cultural diversity is required. What a charge. Sponsorship.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Dana, talk about sponsorship.
Yes, thank you, Melissa. I was going to say, how important it is for others to reach across the aisle, but it is also important to those of us who have been able to enter the rooms. I have fortunately, in my 29-year career, have been given the opportunity to enter rooms that people who look like me are not typically welcome. And in that effort, I also felt a responsibility that if I'm in the room and I don't just represent Dana Hill, but I represent everyone that looks like me. And that I come into that room skilled and prepared so that I can change some of the biases that have been developed and set up. And then I take it a step further of making sure that I reach back and grab somebody's hand and show them the way to enter the room as well. And so it's been very important to me when I was able to connect with Melissa for the first time. I saw so much in her of where I could see Melissa where she is today. I could see it that day that we met. And in that effort, I wanted to make sure that every time I was in a position to recommend Melissa and her skill set and her ability, that I would do so. Every opportunity that I saw, I made sure that I spoke up and mentioned others that I knew that I met along the way that looked like me to be offered an opportunity to be in the room. If you were a minority supplier and you were at a dinner meeting event, I made sure to introduce you to key players in the industry that if they simply said your name and your business again to someone else, because we all believe in net weaving, Dr. Debbie, it was going to mean that your business was going to be successful. I remember a supplier, he did flooring, and I introduced him to key players that I knew if he did good work for them, they would share his business with others in the industry, and he would be successful. He came back to me, found me, and said, Dana, I'll do your whole flooring in your whole house complimentary because I did not expect my business to explode the way it did. And I was like, absolutely not. My thank you is that you go in and you show up and you do quality work like you obviously did, which enabled you to continue to build your business. This is important, guys, that we don't only reach across the aisle, but for those of us who've been given an opportunity, whether you're a regional, whether you are C-suite, whether you are a supplier like myself that's been invited into the boardroom, be intentional about bringing others in behind you. And that means coming in the room, guys, prepared. And often we feel the pressure of being more prepared than anyone else in the room.
Yes.
You know what? I say, okay, it's okay right now. Because when you're a pioneer for anything, it does mean a lot of work. It does mean a lot of building and shifting and navigating. It's okay. It's worth it to do the work because when I see people like Melissa thrive and do what I could see her doing the day I met her, it means everything to me to know that although the wheels of change are moving slowly, I get to see them moving and we get to have a day like today. And then for my mentor, Dr. Debbie, to meet me and decide that I needed to be in those rooms advocating for our industry so that students at UGA and Georgia Tech and Georgia State could see somebody that looked like them as well in a leadership role, because we cannot be what we can't see. And they had the ability to see me in roles of leading the Atlanta office for rent, as well as Apartment Guide, known as Rent Pass Today. And having done that, both positions for over 20 some years in a leadership role, it really did attract many of the students to come back and reach out to me and say, I didn't even think that there was a real opportunity for me until seeing you and meeting you. And so, guys, don't only reach across the aisles for those of you who are in positions to do that, but for those of us who have actually been able to get into some of these rooms and get at that larger table that Dr. Debbie talked about, make sure you reach back. Make sure you help somebody else. Make sure you're willing to be a voice for them where they are not there. Make sure you help them in terms of sponsorship opportunities. I have suppliers that reach out to me frequently asking where should they put their money, where are they going to get the best return on their sponsorship dollars, and I tell them so that they are in a position to see a great return on their investment of their money as well as their time. And so we all, if every one of us make that kind of commitment, we will see the room change.
Wow. A lot of comments about that. I think this is eye-opening. I can kind of feel the scales falling from people's eyes. And Dana, you mentioned advocacy and giving a voice. Guys, if I had to give you a good analogy to help draw the picture, it would be mentorship is like the dating phase of any relationship. Do I like you? Do I want to align with you? Do I want to share my time with you? Am I willing to make the long-term commitment in your success? Sponsorship is kind of like the courtship, and it's like, hey, I'm in this and we're going to walk this out and we're going to come up with a plan to advocate and get you in the room. I oftentimes tell people mentorship is the cup of coffee and the conversation. Sponsorship is actually, hey, you know what? Now that I trust you over coffee, I can invite you into my home. I'm going to invite you into rooms. You may be on site, but I'll sponsor your ticket to the dinner meeting. Or, hey, you know what? You're on the middle management level and you never had a chance to attend Apartment of Lives. I will actually sponsor your ticket, or I'll even call your boss to advocate or sponsor you to come, but your presence is necessary and needed. And then the advocate, which to me is the highest of them all, means you give a voice to someone who's voiceless. Dana and Debbie, the whole reason we're here today is at different points in my career trajectory, and I'm giving you this as an example. Let me be kind of an epistle or example, if you will. I get a lot of messages about, Melissa, how did you get off site? And I started on site 16 years ago. That's the story of many of you who are listening. That means that someone, some regional, some property manager, some leader, some owner took interest in you and ushered you out of your current situation to a future opportunity. They ushered me into the room and sponsorship, but when I wasn't in the room, they spoke my name. They gave a voice to who I was. Dana said, hey, no, this is who you need. Dr. Debbie said, no, this is who you call. Whose name are you speaking?
Well, the other thing, Melissa, I just want to also, remind everybody that it's very powerful when you speak possibility into somebody's life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And, there are two kinds of people. You either have a fixed mindset or you have a growth mindset.
Yeah.
And this is what we're talking about today. We are talking about enlarging the table. We are talking about personal action, and we're 9 minutes down, and we have some powerful questions, but write in your journal right this minute your fabulous 5. Can you name 5 people that are in underrepresented populations that you could bring to the next event? Strive for 5. I want to
like it.
You. Let's get serious here. I call it, we have I maps, me maps, and I'm talking about your M map, your personal action plan.
So Dr. Debbie, I'm going to actually move ahead here because you're speaking to some of the resources we want them to walk away with. For sake of time.
Show them the worksheet, Melissa.
So I know Tara's our time cop here. I don't want to miss out on any questions. I'm going to skip our Q&A. I think they've definitely heard our voices here. But next,
big. Go back to that.
Which one?
You got to show your worksheet.
I'll go into the worksheet. Okay, here we go. That's Dr. Debbie says, big, big, big. If it's big, 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 it's a pretty big deal to her. So here are all of the resources, clickable links, everything in here you can click, download, read, and research. I also included a conversation coaching guide. If you've heard us today, we have implored you to say, hey, look, take a look within, now take action outside of that. And so the conversation guide is a tool I put together to take the webinar today, rewatch it with your teams. You'll get the recording and then whip out this sheet. You can get the free download, just click the link here. And then there's a flip side to this, to help you do what Dr. Debbie said, to write down your Fab Five, okay? But then you're gonna set intention. You're gonna make a list of opportunities. It's kind of like, you ever played that game Match, where you draw a line from the word to the meaning, okay? You're gonna draw a line from your person to their opportunity. There is no higher form of advocacy than connecting people to their next opportunity. So if you don't take anything else away from this today, understand this. Conversations are good, but solutions are required. And we've given you immediate solutions to take today to your team. Dana, would you like to share what Grace Hill is doing next? I don't see questions. Let me just check the chat because I don't want to miss anybody here. Jay, thank you so much for your comments here. Thank you to all of the guests who have dropped your comments, your thoughts. If there are no, I don't see a question. Tara, do you see any questions that I may have missed throughout the duration of the webinar before we wrap up for today? No questions. Okay, just compliments. Listen, we appreciate the compliments. We appreciate your time. We don't take that for granted, but what we would appreciate, the highest compliment, the highest form of flattery is action. Action. So Dana, would you like to share next steps? This was a kickoff call, a precursor to what Grace Hill is doing from here forward for conversations and training. You're literally building a coaching guide on overcoming racial bias and establishing better diversity and inclusion immediately. And before I release it to Dana, one quick thought. Tara asked us, I had to say this, Tara, I'd be remiss if I didn't. Tara asked us before the call, hey, how do we get immediate action? Like, people are calling for board members to step down and things like that. And I said, you know what? You get immediate action through succession planning. And Dr. Debbie, I'm going to go there because you told me to go there. For leaders who've been sitting in your seat and in your office for 10, 20, 30 years, and you have not identified a successor who is not like you, then shame on you. It's now time. Remember, the climate has changed, so your structure is required to be renovated here. Go back and identify a successor, okay? Establish a clear line of changing of the guards, of handing over these positions. Long gone are the times, and forgive me, we were going to talk about just the white male-driven industry. For the majority, white male-driven organizations, saying to you, you have an obligation to be intentional on reaching within every level of your organization, because the talent does not stop at the top, but the buck does stop with you. Dr. Debbie and Dana, thank you so much. Dana, tell them what's next at Grace Hill for a follow-up to today's kickoff call.
Melissa, thank you so much for teeing this up, that this was just the very beginning. Grace Hill has partnered with this industry for over 20 some years, and we've really navigated this road through multifamily for our industry, and we're not stopping. We are only getting even better and stronger. And so one of the things I heard today was never trust your future to your memory. So not only do you have the resources that will be shared with you, but Grace Hill will be continuing to offer courses such as diversity and inclusion for the employee as well as for the supervisor. And it will be both in English and Spanish. We'll also offer diversity and inclusion refreshers, and coming soon, overcoming bias and microaggressions. Grace Hill is taking immediate action to ensure that these courses are an intentional part of our core competency offering. So what we want to see is that these are part of the onboarding process. It is important, guys, that we take this seriously and we move from discussion to solution to action to seeing the change that we want to see. And in order to do that, just like we require fair housing, just like we require workplace sexual harassment, we need to require that if you are going to be a part of this organization, that you understand diversity and inclusion and the importance of it, and that you are held accountable to refresh on that information every year, just like fair housing, and that coming soon, you will even have overcoming bias and microaggressions. And I think these are very important for our leaders, or if you are going to be in any role of leadership in your organization, that these courses should be required.
Awesome. Final thoughts, Dr. Debbie Phillips.
Well, I just want to say, you know, nobody wakes up proud to be part of a problem. You know, we're proudest and we enjoy talking about being part of a solution. And there's many of you on this call that I know your names, and you're solution oriented. You came out of the womb with solutions. And I'm looking to see solutions all over our social media, but more importantly, I'm looking for solutions in our own circles of influence. And I want to just see the change. And I want you to think about being the change that you truly wish to see. And I've been honored to be a part of this panel, and nothing lights me up more than seeing one of my mentees like Melissa leading the charge. And I've got a whole host of a lot of mentees, and you got to be proud, people, to want to put your name on something. I used to have students that they didn't put their name on their paper, and I'd have to go chase them. Be proud of it. Be part of the solution and put your name on it.
Put your name on it. I love it. Final question, if to Dana or Tara or someone from the Grace Hill team. Terry Maury asked, how soon for the new courses? When will they be released?
As I understand it, we are currently building these courses today. And so we do not have a release date. I wish I did. I would have posted that for you. But since we are currently in it and vetting it, it will be certainly before the end of this quarter that it'll be available. Or certainly.
So I hope I'm not getting ahead here. I think my understanding is we're going through some test rounds, and then that there are, I think, members of your Leaders Council and even maybe some of your power users who will be able to test some of this content. But stay connected. Make sure you're following Grace Hill. They have a page with all of their webinars listed. But I concur and echo your sentiments, Dana, that it's time out for just making this a trending topic, that this needs to be a part of our onboarding, no different than sexual harassment training and fair housing, of eradicating bias, racial bias, and solutions that every leader in your organization and on all of our boards should take that training. Thank you all for your time today. Dr. Debbie Phillips and Dana Hill, I honor you for your time, your commitment, and your fact-driven solutions that you've given us today. Grace Hill team, thank you again for hosting us. Have a wonderful afternoon. Go take action. Go find your Fab Five and let us know how it goes as you do change. Thank you so much. Have a great afternoon. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Love y'all.
Love you back.